If they can keep you exhausted, they can keep you quiet. And that is why choosing pleasure on purpose, unapologetically, boldly, and loudly is one of the most radical things a Black woman can do. I am Dr. Nikki. I am here. I'm live. I'm running a little late. The ADHD was getting me today. I'm gonna be real honest with time management, but I'm here. I'm ready to go. Are you here? Are you excited for this conversation? I 1000% am ready to fully get into why choosing pleasure is a radical act, especially for Black women. Which is today's episode. Now, I'm just gonna put you all in my business. I live in a townhouse. I am upstairs in the third floor, and my child is downstairs on the first floor singing her little heart out. So if you hear anything, it's her. Okay, she can't be stopped. She loves to sing her heart out. So I think this mic cancels out a lot of the stuff. But in case you hear some like screaming and hollering, you know where it's coming from. Thank you so much for being here with me. I'm so excited to get into today's topic. This is really at the heart and the core of everything that I do. I have had the pleasure and the privilege to be able to really sit and think about the relationship between pleasure and liberation and sex and liberation and Black women for the vast majority of my career. And today, as we are entering this month of June, I wanted to sort of take a step back and pull you into my thinking, pull you into my world to let you sort of see what is the foundation of all of these topics that I'm always talking about. Um, June is also Pride Month, and that feels like a very important time for us to sort of talk about radical actions. You know, Pride was started by a riot, and it was started by a Black and a brown woman, trans women, throwing a brick, being refused to be silenced, being refused to be shrunk into some version of who they are that was palatable to white people. So, and cis men in particular. So to talk about choosing pleasure as a radical act, especially for Black women, feels very, very on par for this month. June is also Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, right? I think there is a lot that's happening in the broader podcast zeitgeist around Black men and Black women. And I think it is a deep reflection of a lot of the unresolved mental health challenges that a lot of Black men have. And so let's get into pleasure, radicalism, and Black women. So we can think about the term radical in its sort of like traditional sense, right? Its most limited definition. And so that means to sort of like make a choice that creates like upheaval, right? I always like to refer to Angela Davis's definition of radical because she says radical simply means grasping things at the root. And the reason why this is aligned with how I think about pleasure in Black women is at the root of the experience of Black womanhood in this country has always been one of servitude, has always been one of not having bodily autonomy, has been one of either polarized sexuality. Either you are completely asexual, like the mammy, the matriarch, big mama, or you are a wholly wanton, dangerous, like sexual creature, the Jezebel, the freak, the hoe, right? That being able to sort of identify, own, self describe, self develop who we are as sexual beings has not been at the root of what our experiences have been as Black women. And so when I talk about pleasure as a radical act, I simply mean that. Like, let's pull the lie up from the roots that we are only built for endurance, for survival, for caring for others, for being in service to others. Um, and let's center ourselves. Let's center what would feel good to us. Let's center what would fulfill us. Because for me, even that way of thinking, of like servitude and everyone else first, then you, right? Mama Zora talks about Black women being mules of the earth, right? Hortense Spillers has this beautiful essay about if America didn't have Black women, it would have created Black women, because the function that Black women serve really um, creates all of sort of the infrastructure with around which all the other functions of this messed up country serve, right? And so we're at the bedrock. And so this, to me, it is a very capitalistic, white supremacist, um, heteropatriarchal framework to say you do all the work first, right? Like very puritanical. You do all the work first, and then you get your dessert. You have to earn your pleasure. And I say, quite frankly, fuck that. Because my believing is, if we center pleasure, if we bring it to the root, if we root ourselves in joy, if we root ourselves in feeling good, if we root ourselves in embodiment, then that is all energy that is generative. That is all energy that is creative. That is all energy that is loving. That is life force sustainability. And so, if we were to then take that entire script and radically flip it on its head, what we are left with is nothing but possibility. We've lived how many centuries with in the craziest white man's imagination doing it this way. And all this led to is people being more divided, more angry, more without resources, more fractured mentally, more disjointed communally. It ain't working. And so for me, we want to go to the direct opposite and draw from pleasure, draw from a center of from expansiveness. And let's see what comes of that. So I'm interested to know, in the comments, let me know even what you think about what radical means. Do you like Angela Davis's definition? Do you not? And what kind of gets sparked for you when you hear me as a Black woman talk about Black women radically choosing pleasure, or Black women in pleasure? I think just the very idea of it can be incendiary for some folks, quite honestly. I want to know, even for you, if you are a Black woman, if you love a Black woman, what does that pull for you? Does it trigger any discomfort for you? That's a part of the conversation, right? We don't get to move through being more whole and healed and healthy if we don't talk about the pain points, if we don't excise those wounds. So if it does pull up something for you, let me know. Hey, thank you for being here. Um, and yeah, please let me know what you think about this idea of pleasure for Black women and this concept of radicalism, if it pulls something up for you. I will share that the other reason that I talk about pleasure and I don't talk about sex specifically, and that is intentional. I love sex. I think it's one of the greatest things that we've been given in this human experience. I think everybody that is of an adult age and consenting, um, and is allosexual, should be able to have all the types of sex and all the sex that they want for their lives in the ways that they exactly want. It's a beautiful thing. And if we only limit ourselves to sexual pleasure, we really are cutting ourselves off from an expansive experience as human beings, and vice versa. The more that we have an expansive understanding about pleasure, actually, the more we have a sense of embodiment and what brings us pleasure, what lights us up, what turns us on, and that then begets. Okay, I'm taking it back to the old English. That begets more erotic pleasure. So I will own that I have always been a little bit of an outlier. I had the privilege of being a part of Dr. Candace Nicole Hargan's book launch. She has a wonderful book. It's called Good Sex Story Science and Strategies for Liberation. Um, and in the launch party, it was a virtual launch party, and there were lots of other sexologists, sex therapists, sex coaches, educators. And at one point we were like, were you the weird sex girl? Like, were you the weird sex nerd? And all of us were like, yes, we were. So I know that I've always been a bit of an outlier about that. And so I have been curious about, open-minded about, communicative about sex for a long time in my life. I was the friend that everybody went to in high school and college to, like, how am I supposed to do this and how you do that and what this and what that. That's always been me. So I know that I am a bit of an outlier when it comes to that. But even in that being true for me, that doesn't mean that I haven't internalized a lot of garbage around pleasure and what I'm allowed to have as a Black woman, right? None of us sort of like live in any cultural context and not internalize the ideas, myths, beliefs, expectations of said culture, right? We don't escape for that. So I'm curious, sort of, what comes up for you when you think about Black women and pleasure? Were there messages you were explicitly told about Black women and pleasure? And I mean that erotically or just like feeling good. Because one of the myths that I hear, or like a theme that comes up and that really kicked off my desire to look at this from a scholarly lens to really center my professional work and career around this, was I had the opportunity to co-facilitate a therapy group for Black college women when I was on internship at the University of Maryland. This was in the early 2000s. I mean, like 2000. Okay, 2001, like baby 2000s. And sex and intimacy, and guilt and shame and lack of knowledge, all of that stuff kept coming up as regular themes in the group. And I was like, there is something here. And I was really shocked by a lot of the things that I was hearing. And that is really what led me to want to talk about, study, be curious about, dedicate my life's work to what is like normative, healthy sexual behavior, expectations, beliefs, and standards for Black women. And this idea that like seeking pleasure or doing things that make you happy just for the sake thereof, that sort of indulgence, all of these things come along with a lot of guilt and shame. That there's something very specific that Black women are indoctrinated to in terms of choosing things for ourselves as being selfish, and like being selfish as one of the like worst insults. If you are, so I'm Gen Z. Let me fully own that. I was working with what would be considered probably millennials, like maybe even elder millennials at the time, right? I'm curious if you're in that if you would note like what is your generational status, and if those messages are still true for you, that to put yourself first, to choose something for you, to even think about indulging, if that is connotated with being selfish, and if as a Black woman you were told that being selfish was not a good thing, like it's almost like an insult. You know how like white people are like, that's not, you can't call me racist. You know how they like freak out when anybody implies that they're racist. I feel like Black women being told we're selfish is the equivalent of that. It's like a deep mortal wound to our like character. And so that sort of shame sits in deep. Being able to sort of work against that takes some intentionality and rewiring of your mindset, right? The other thing that I love in terms of talking about pleasure is I say pleasure is a pathway to liberation. I think a lot of times, yes, that resonates with you. Being selfish is like the worst thing ever, and nobody wants to be selfish. And then the other, I'll go back for a second and say another layer to that is if we talk about sexual pleasure, right? No, absolutely not. Then you are fast. I'm from Louisiana. We have some like kind of unique Southern slang. And I could just remember hearing the elders in my family saying, you love fast tail girls and she hot and she fast, like all of these like negative things. I mean, and the things associated with being fast and hot would be like wearing perfume, wanting to get your nails painted. Like, it so like we have been disconnected from our rightful access to pleasure, and specifically erotic or sexual pleasure, right? Which is why I say pleasure is a pathway to liberation. I think a lot of times in our sort of anti oppressive movements, our liberatory movements, resistance movements, we talk sort of about like, think about it as like a end state. Like we need to do these things to get there. And I think that what we really need to do is embody the things that we want in a liberated place in the now. Like you need to live in it now. You need to embody the things that reflect a more evolved, expansive, liberated, inclusive, collectivist, connected, um, justice oriented world now. It's like you can't continue to stay steeped in the toxic shit and think this all of a sudden you're going to be clean. Like what's the process? Where's that wash off, right? Where's that hose down? We got to purge. And so one of the ways that we do that, I believe, I'm sorry, let me slow down. If a liberated future does not include pleasure, I don't want it. Like for me there is no liberation of any people, but especially of Black folks, that doesn't allow, facilitate, celebrate, affirm Black women having any and everything that they desire to have based on their own definition and authentic needs. Like, what are we doing? Because anything else is just a recreation of patriarchy. Anything else is just a recreation of white supremacy. And I'm not interested in that at all. That is not liberation. So, if the goal, right, if we're working towards a liberated future, pro Black, pro joy, pro pleasure, pro justice, pro relationship, pro intimacy, then you have to have pleasure. It just feels like a very no duh to me, right? So then the next layer is embodying pleasure, pursuing pleasure, prioritizing pleasure of all forms along the continuum is critical, essential, needed now. It is the pathway. It is the goal, but it's also the pathway. Because when you are in an enlightened state, when you're in a heightened state, when you're feeling good, one, when you experience pleasure, you are in the present moment. There's not a time in your life. Now, that's not the same thing as having those like, post-session flashbacks. Okay. We've all had those where you can just go off in your mind to where you were a couple hours ago. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the initial experience thereof. Pleasure requires you to be fully embodied and fully in the present moment. We are at our highest state of awareness, the most expansive expression of our humanity when we are in the present moment. So, and we should be in the present moment more than we're not. So, pleasure is a pathway to liberation because it gives us the roadmap to continue to move towards the destination that we want. But it also fuels us in our capacity and ability to be able to do the work of resistance, of radical behavior to get to the destination that we want. It's not an activist that has been or ever was that did the work out of bitterness, like did the work out of that did the work sustainably, authentically out of like negativity and bitterness and hate. Has to be rooted in a love ethic. It has to be rooted in an optimism ethic. It has to be rooted in a joy. I'm just saying, can we just name that pleasure is also a part of it? You're not doing all of this work to feel more bad. We're doing this work. We resist, we push back, we sustain because feeling good is our birthright. I went to do a line dancing class on Sunday. It was the first time I had done that. I had a good time. I learned like 4 different line dances. First of all, let's talk about the genius and creativity there of Black folks. Like, why do we have literally 50, 11 dozen different line dances? And they're all different. Now, like 70% of them might include a little cha cha cha. They all got a little twirl and turn, but the steps, the rhythm to do it, how you do that turn, how many turns you take, different. How are we that amazing? But I digress. And so on the way home, yes, that's right. That's right. Pleasure has to be at the core. Trying to do work in bondage. And here's the thing. And thank you so much for that comment, because before I go off on my line dancing tangent, I want to acknowledge, right? Um, when I talk about pleasure, I think part of what triggers people is they think that, we just sitting around having nonstop orgasms, or like no work is getting done, or people are just being selfish and indulging in what, like, it feels like gluttonous in some ways. And that's not the point. The reality is the way that this world is set up, the way that we got to chase these checks and get these coins, and everybody's doing it, whether you're working hard for somebody or whether you're working on manifesting, meditating, getting alignment. We all putting in work, taking care of these kids, trying to stay healthy, dodging bullets, whatever it is. We live in a crazy country. And so even if you do the work of centering pleasure, there is so much that's pulling you away from that. So I think that's a false notion that you're going to be like indulging in things all the time, like the world is just going to burn down. I don't know. I really don't know what that sort of false thinking is, right? So none of us are like constantly, I shouldn't say none of us. There's a very few of us that are like constantly like just joyful and lit up and full of pleasure. What we can do is have that be the greater balance of what our life is, right? That's what I'm advocating for. That's what we're trying to be. But I went to the line dancing class, and on the way home, I was on the phone with my bestie. I was like, man, that was fun. Like, I had a good time. It wasn't too much. I got a little sweat going. It was like light cardio, but it was a good time. And I was like, and it was, the class was like 20 people in the class. Vast majority were women. I was like, it don't matter what's going on. Black people are going to find some time for joy. And that is one thing that I love about us. So I think inherently to our sort of the fiber and fabric of who we are culturally, we get that. I think is when I start talking about pleasure from an erotic lens, when I start talking about women having bodily autonomy and sexual autonomy, that makes people nervous. And I think that's because it pushes up against patriarchy. Now, Black people in patriarchy, we got a whole lot of work to do. Black people in heteronormativity, we got a lot of work to do, right? But I think that pushes up against some of that, and some of that internalized classes of, as I think about it. I think that the erotic part, but we got the joy part down. And we know that our people only survived, our ancestors only survived the atrocities and traumas and degradations that they survived in enslavement and Reconstruction and Jim Crow and all of the other things, the current police state that we live in. The only way that we have been able to survive and withstand and sustain and overcome is because we have kept joy as a core component of who we are. White supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy has corrupted a lot of shit. But what it hasn't done is taken that from us. Just this morning, it was a really beautiful moment. Just this morning, I was in the kitchen with my daughter. She's 13. So we're in a good place now. I can sort of like talk to her like for real, like vibe. And so I was like showing her a couple TikToks that I had seen. I was like, look at this. And we were laughing. And then I went on to like kept making my little smoothie. And she was like, you know what, mama? She's like, I don't think there's been a day that I've been alive that we haven't laughed together. Like, and I was like, you know what? And she was like, even when we beefing, she was like, either we start off beefing and then by the end of the day, I apologize, or it kind of go wrong, maybe at the end of the day, and we go to bed. But at some point in that day, we have laughed together. And one, I'm so grateful for that to have to be her reality. I'm that like, man, chef's kiss. Love that for her. But that she could acknowledge that, right? That no matter what the craziness that we go through, and look, life's for Dr. Nikki. I don't know who you think I am based on how you know me, but life for Dr. Nikki. But even in that, I'm gonna always find a little chuckle. I'm going to maybe sometimes laugh to keep from crying, but I'm gonna always find a little chuckle. What I want to continue to do also, especially for Black women, is challenge you to have as much comfort, accessibility, sense of empowerment for, and ownership of pleasure. Not performing pleasure, not pleasure through the male gaze, or not for anybody else, but just for you. I really want us to have that, because the other thing is, I'm truly convinced, like, a sexually empowered Black woman is one of the most formidable beings on the planet, right? So part of this is my own personal, like, purpose and mission in life, right? Um, I I struggle at times with my own relationship to pleasure. As much as I talk about it, it's crazy. But as much as I talk about it, I still have to go through my own thing. I can still end up in a rut, being so, especially as an entrepreneur. And then, especially as I have sort of gotten into this perimenopause, almost menopausal window with hormonal changes. And then over the last 18 months with grief and mourning of my mother, um, I have to be intentional to check in with myself and be like, you know what, you just been grinding. Like, you just out here working, just going, just checking things off the list and going to bed, checking things off the list, going to bed, responding to other people's needs, going to bed, taking care of everybody else, going to bed. And so, no, that's probably why you feel so bleh, right? And so, I have had to really keep myself accountable for continuing to challenge myself gently, lovingly, to be curious about ways that I can seek pleasure. Where can I find the space for play? Where can I do something in the day that just does something for me? Even if I'm not partnered, where can I get my erotic pleasure? Where are the things that I still want to sort of explore and know and remind myself of for myself? And so I do this work because I believe in it. If you can't tell by now, I don't know another way that I can convince you more. I so deeply believe that this is really at what the core of what will bring us a full, like, revolution and liberation. And I'm trying to do my part of that, but also because um if I'm doing the work, then I have to hold myself accountable, and it just makes it that much easier for me. I don't always hit the mark either, right? Some of that stuff, especially with me and mothering, some of that stuff around selfishness and, like, taking care of your kid, for all of that stuff. Some of it is in there and you don't even know it's in there until you have a life experience and you're like, wait a minute, where did that random thought come from? That I don't even believe that, right? So I'm going to encourage you to sort of continue to have that internal conversation with yourself, to continue to be curious about, are there other layers to this? Do I have another layer to these internalized messages about selfish being pleasure? I mean, pleasure being selfish, about pleasure being selfish, right? Am I holding on to other people's values that are not actually mine? And how can I gently but efficiently let them go, right? I want to go back to the top in terms of Angela Davis saying we're going to be radical by simply grasp the thing at the root, right? Pull out the lie. Get to that core lie, that core belief that you are not worthy of pleasure, that you should not have access to it, that you have to earn it, that you have to do it in a particular way, that you have to be respectable. Get at the root of all of that for you, and yank it out. Okay. Prune it. Let it go. If you're still here with me, any questions? I thank you for the love in the comments. This makes me feel so seen. I do so much better when I know there's somebody actually there. So I deeply appreciate you. If you have a question for me, drop it in the comments. If there's something you want me to talk about more or anything else, please let me know. I am going to pull up our Dr. Nikki Knows for the week. Let me get on over here to it. Let yourself unfold. Yeah. Let yourself unfold. So this week's Dr. Nikki, dear Dr. Nikki, honestly, all of this pleasure talk makes me uncomfortable. Okay. Growing up, girls who were in the streets or boy crazy were called fast or hot tails by the elders and freaks and hoes by my peers. Now, all of a sudden, I'm supposed to just indulge in pleasure. It seems too off base for me. Help, help. And I helped, right? I think that is a hard transition that a lot of Black women struggle with. And don't let you be in the church. Baby, you're not having no pleasure. You're not having no fun unless it is under the auspices of holy matrimony in context of the marriage bed, right? Anything else is deemed nasty. You Jezebel, you're not of the Lord. And that you might rebel against your mom and daddy or people in your neighborhood, but a lot of people have a hard time rebelling against God, right? So I think that that is true for so many Black women. I will remind us we still have orgasm inequality. That is still a thing. That in heterosexual dynamics, cis men are much more likely to experience orgasm and having intercourse or any type of sexual interaction than heterosexual cis women, right? And so that means not the comment. My mother still thinks I've not had sex. I was married and have 2 children, but y'all know y'all not talking about it. I know y'all not. I know y'all not talking about it. I will say this though. So I think part of what I think part of what um let me be like a weird sex nerd, like allowed me to even get to this place was one, my mother and father were not religious. They did not go to church. They now ironically, both of their mothers were very much in the church. They went to the same church. My dad's mom was the head deaconess, Deaconess Ethel Coleman. And my mom's mom was the like head usher, Sarah Ambrose, right? They were deep in that church. They went every Sunday of my life that they were alive, but their children didn't. I would describe both of my parents as like agnostic, really. um and so while I did go to Sunday school, I got kicked out. And while I did go to church for a good bit when I was little, right, they sort of like capitulated culturally and sent me. Um, and I went to Catholic school. It's a difference in my experience in those church kids that went every Sunday. They did Sunday school. They got baptized every vacation Bible school, like all that stuff. I didn't come really encumbered with that, and I think that that helped me a great deal. And while my mother wasn't like we didn't sit around and talk about her sex life or my sex life, she also didn't shy away talking about sex with me. She took like a more intellectual approach. Like I remember she had these little pamphlets that she gave me when I was in like 3rd grade or whatever about reproduction and my period and all that sort of stuff. And she was like, read these. And when you're done, let me know if you have questions. And I was like, I was like, I don't, because my reading comprehension is A plus plus. I got it. Cool. Right. So we didn't really have a lot of conversation. When I went to college, the first year I came back home, when I got home, like very shortly upon like getting all my stuff out of the car, she came up to me and like right in my eyes, she was like, you started having sex. And I was like, Yes. And then I ran to my room. She was like, as long as you use that protection, da, 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 right? So we had moments where we talked about it. And I think all of that sort of unencumbered me. But I know that my experience is real, it's not typical in a lot of ways. And I know that because I am a Black woman and I have a lot of Black women friends. My clients are Black women. And so I want to again just acknowledge the sort of truth of the question. Let me put it back up there. Right. And so some people do find it hard to make that transition, right? To just go from avoiding and doing everything to not be this really negative, vilified thing to wanting to be fully embodied in their pleasure. Like, how do you just do that? And I want to encourage you to acknowledge that the first step is that you have the right to do that, that you now are a grown woman. You get to do what you want to do. It's okay. It really is okay. You don't lose any power. You don't lose any of your agency. You don't lose any of your self-worth. There's no loss to you that you in your adulthood and your full expression and experience of your authentic self decide to pursue erotic pleasure, sexual pleasure. That's one. I think the other thing is to help build your confidence and certainty around that is getting some good sex education. I think that there is a extreme lack of inclusive, comprehensive sex ed in this country. And so sometimes the things that gets in our way is legitimately lack of education. To just know more about how your body works, what is normative for you, to understand hormones, to understand the women's sexual response cycle, like to just get curious about your body and get informed. The other thing that I always tell people is very quite simply, the clitoris is the only organ on the body designed only for pleasure. We the only one that's got a clitoris. Think about that. Men have penises, um, testes, those things are sexual organs, but they do not only act as sexual organs, they do a whole lot of other things, right? They multitask. But the clitoris is the only organ on a human body that is designed purely for pleasure. It don't do nothing else. It's just waiting for a good time. That's it. That's all. And the clitoris has like 3 times the amount of nerve endings than the penis. Come on. If that is not like a, hey, y'all, have pleasure. I gave you a special button just for that. I don't know what else you would want God to tell you. I just really don't. Right. So set yourself free. Start to define your own pleasure on your own terms, right? I have a handy dandy tool. It's called the Pleasure Pursuit. You can find it on my website. I also put a link in the show notes that like can it really facilitate that journey for you. I'll tell you that I have laid out the ways for you to build your relationship with yourself as a pleasurable being, how to prioritize your pleasure, how to really be thoughtful and reflective about your experiences in this. This is intentionally designed to help so many women who want to make changes, who want to center their pleasure and not quite sure ready to start or haven't done enough work to sort of release shame and they're not ready to like talk about it with someone just yet. So this is self-paced. This is for you, 52 weeks of pleasure right here. If you think that having an accountability partner, working through some stuff, maybe even the experience of having sexual trauma, whether you've named it or not, those are all things that could be in the way as well. And I work with folks one-on-one to do that work. And I'm going to give you a pleasure practice for the week. So you could even start here. So let's get into this week's pleasure practice. Yeah. Let yourself unfold. I love my little theme music. It's such a vibe to me. Okay, so this week's pleasure practice. This week's pleasure practice is a little bit different. what I want you to do is take note of all the times throughout the week that you tell yourself no. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to do a little reverse psychology. I want you to really take note. If you could, it would be super duper awesome. Even if you just open up a little notes app, get your little notebook, get your little sheet of paper, a little sticky note, just tally how many times you deny yourself in a week. I imagine it is way more than you have told yourself that it actually is. That you don't do something because it's not the right thing. It's not the right time. You want to leave some for someone else. You're focusing on your health. You're not going to buy tortilla chips with salt on them because you can't have that indulgence. I'm talking to somebody specifically in the audience on that one, and they should feel attacked. No, but seriously, I think that you tell yourself no, you deny yourself, you talk yourself out of feeling good more times than you allow yourself to consider what it might be like for you to indulge your pleasure, to pursue your pleasure. And here's the reason why. All the stuff I just talked about, number one. But two, let's talk a little bit about brain-based behavior and what we know. What we know is our brains are primed to seek the negative. Because when we experience something new or novel or different, it is perceived as a threat. And so our brains are extremely efficient, but they're not very smart. And so what happens is, as we are constantly, and we have like I think it's 3 million. Somebody fact check me on that. I think it's like 3 million points of stimuli that's coming at our brain at any given time. So we're sifting through so much. We think we're sifting through it sort of consciously. Most of that is happening in this subcortex. And what is happening is the environment is we're constantly scanning for threats because our primary goal as humans is to stay safe, is for the system to keep going, to be okay. And what that looks like is negative, denial, no, critique, all of that gets lumped together. It's just the same thing in the brain. And so the more you tell yourself no, the more attuned and habituated and accustomed your brain is to saying no. And so what I want you to do is really look at how much you are not doing things that you want to do because they would feel good to you. Now, I'm not saying that I want you to go out and do all the things, right? We still have to be adults and mature and make decisions for the long term. We can't always be indulgent of our short-term desires, right? This isn't about being hedonistic. But I do want you to sort of get educated and enlightened for yourself about how much you are gatekeeping your own pleasure and joy. Okay? Now, do that for a week. Keep your little tally marks and come back and report. Let me know. Let me know what you find out. I bet you tell yourself no more than you tell yourself yes. And if I'm wrong, please let me know. Okay? That is your pleasure practice for a week. So just start there, right? We don't have to radical. The reason why I focus on radical changes is because it can be a very tiny shift that has massive consequences for the better, right? Impact. Small change, big impact. That is part of what makes it radical. Okay? Thank you all so much for being here with me today. I have had an absolute blast. I love that there were people here to share this time with me. As always, if you have questions, if you're watching this on the replay, drop the comments. Drop them in the comments. I'll see them. I respond. Okay. This is real to me. This relationship, we're getting to know each other. I want to know you. You want to know me. So if you have thoughts, questions, anything, the links to the pleasure pursuit, the links to booking a free consultation with me, all of that is going to be in the show notes that you can see later on. And yeah, just go out there and pursue pleasure unapologetically. Thank you all.